Hey peeps, it's Tripl-L, and now let's talk about Fairy Tail chapter 515? Yeah, let's talk about it. So I initially made this video, and it was a bit more aggressive than I would have liked it to be, so I scrapped it, and I'm redoing it now. So, guys, let's be clear. I think overall this is a good chapter. Overall, it's very useful. It fills in some of Eileen's character, tells us why she is the way she is, tells us a bit about her past. You know, that's all useful. And it ultimately tells us Erza's resolution on the whole matter. Now, on a personal level, I have some conflicting feelings. I feel the first half is very, very strong, and once we get into the second half, it starts to kind of damper a bit because things are getting slightly rushed. And then I guess the last third of the chapter, which is just Eileen and Erza talking in real time, that's where the chapter just becomes I think it weakens at that point. Overall though, my frustrations from that last part of the chapter are all dependent on what happens with Eileen afterward, because if this is a case where there's more information that needs to be said, then this chapter is good because this frustration is, I guess, foreshadowing or indicative of more information coming. Or if this is it for Eileen's development, if we don't find anything else out, then this chapter kind of falls down in my eyes. It's a very complex chapter. Well, sorry, it's a very complex feeling for me. So let's talk about the first half of the chapter that was really good. In the first half, we find out Erza's father, that he was a political marriage thing, that he was with Eileen throughout the battles. He was there when Belsarion died, and he was there to see Acnologia. Acnologia was really cool to know the time frame of when he showed up in the war. That was a very worthwhile bit of information. And then we see the whole thing with Eileen becoming a dragon, and this guy being scared, and ultimately putting Eileen through horrors. Now let's talk about the torture. You know, I've seen that some people are very disturbed, or like they see this as very, very dark. And I will agree, like the images are very disturbing. They're disturbing on a fundamental level. And the one that really does it for me is where like she's hogtied and there's an executioner guy behind her and she's just like blindfolded. That one gets to me. And then the crucifixion again. The thing is, Fairy Tail has always been very, very good with very dark imagery. The first ones that come to mind are the crucifixion scenes. The crucifixion of Shadowgear and the crucifixion of Sabretooth. You know, those are very fundamentally disturbing images. So the fact that Fairy Tail can pull fundamentally disturbing images is nothing new to me, in all honesty. It's just Fairy Tail being Fairy Tail. And like in typical Fairy Tail fashion, they don't dwell on it. They don't dwell on that imagery at all. They just show that it happens and they just continue. You know, because otherwise, if you think about it, like it's the process of putting people in those situations, it's disturbing. If you watch someone tie someone up to crucify them or to put metal on their hands to like pretty much link them to a giant tree, it's a very gross process. But of course, Fairy Tail won't dwell on it. They'll just tell you, yeah, this shit happens. And so with that segment, you know, just establishes, yeah, Eileen was put through utter hell, and Fairy Tail's doing this thing where they're showing the worst parts of humanity, and specifically making it a loved one who was there with you the whole time, and Erza's father, just showing that ultimately fear got the better of him, and that this is not a good person. And then when he ultimately goes to slash at Eileen to tell her that that is not his child, and we find out that Eileen's been using enchantment magic to keep Erza like kind of suspended in a certain state. You know, pretty cool stuff. And yeah, anyway, we see how she gets the scar because we see that he's the one that cuts at her, and that's how she kind of receives that scar on the abdomen. Pretty cool stuff again. And then ultimately seeing her turn into a dragon. That was pretty cool. I'm saying cool a lot, but her dragon form, it's really beautiful dragon. Really beautiful dragon. I really like the art on that one. So once the dragon transformation happens, you know, we move into the, I guess, mental torture aspect of Eileen's character, and we just see that she's having trouble accepting that she's turned into a dragon. And so now it becomes this kind of, I guess, ideological battle of what it means to be human and what it means to be a monster. And ultimately, after a couple hundred years, she runs into Zaref. Zaref gives her a physical form, and now she deals with this kind of identity crisis where pretty much the senses of a dragon are still there, and she's having trouble matching it with what she originally remembers as being human. So it's like the motion sickness, but on an existential level, right? Because it's all coming from the senses of a dragon. The same way that the motion sickness is caused because the visual acuity of a dragon doesn't match up with the balance centers of the human head. And so that's why the motion sickness happens. Now it's just like the dragon's overall powerful senses just don't work on a human level. So she loses things like the ability to taste, and she loses things like the ability to sleep. Now, I'm not sure if that means dragons don't taste things, if that means dragons don't sleep. Maybe dragons can learn how to sleep, but since Eileen never really bothered embracing her dragon way, maybe she never figured it out. As for the taste, I can see very, very well that dragons being such like an overpowering being things that are above humans in some literature, maybe tasting is something they just gave up because they don't need that pleasure in life. That's a very human sensation. So the tasting, whatever, that can be explained. The sleeping thing is a bit more interesting because I'm pretty sure dragons sleep, or maybe they pretend to sleep. Maybe they just close their eyes and just kind of sit there. Anyway, it's bad. Eileen's problem is ultimately coming from the way she's experiencing the world and the fact that this isn't how she categorizes human experience. And then now we're coming into Erza's origins. The origins are interesting. We ultimately find out Erza is a human child, but maybe she has some effects because Eileen turned into a dragon while Erza is still in her womb. We know that the enchantment magic was effectively keeping her suspended, and then once Eileen gets her plan that, because Erza is a human baby, she can just enchant herself into Erza and be born again as a human, and we ultimately find out that fails. And then after that, we just find out a bit more about how Eileen just dumped Erza in some random village and just went on her way, and now we're at where we're at. Okay, so sorry, I just had to recap. My overall gripe with this chapter comes in that moment, the moment that Eileen ultimately says that she just dumped Erza in a village. And the reason that moment doesn't jive well with me, and again, this is something, my overall thoughts on this moment will change, and it's going to be entirely dependent on whether or not there's a follow-up to this. But if Eileen's character ends here, then whatever. The thing that slightly bothered me was that she just goes into, after she failed to become one with her child, she just says she lost interest in her and dumped her like trash. Okay, that's a very anticlimactic thing from Eileen. Very anticlimactic. And you could say you could respect that. That's just life. Sometimes life is anticlimactic, and that's just true to life. Yeah, but the thing is, Eileen is a very bombastic character. She has established this. She has a giant ego, and she is very exaggerated and bombastic. And let's just look through what she has done in the past. She's also the same person who turned a princess into a frog and then made her father confront said frog to make him see whether or not he could still love his daughter even if she was in such an ugly form. That's how far Eileen would go to talk about the ugliness in a daughter. Next, when she realized that Erza might be nearby, she's the person who summoned a giant eye in the sky just to verify whether or not Erza was there, and then she had a bit of a cold sweat after it. Look, those reactions are not the reaction of someone who could just lose interest in a failed experiment and dump it like trash. That doesn't make sense. I don't think that makes sense with what Eileen has established for herself. This woman who overreacts and has the ego the size of Acnologia's dragon form. No, especially not when she has that whole thing about children and making that princess turn into a frog. I think it was a frog. It's just those two, those moments and this moment are just clashing in my head. It's just, it doesn't make sense. Ultimately I could make sense of it if I really wanted to, but right now it's just, no, there is something more to this. And the reason I'm going to say something more is because let's face it, Erza was in the womb of a dragon. There is no way that doesn't affect her. And Erza was having magic continuously poured into her. There is no way that that doesn't affect Erza somehow. I don't know what ultimately came out of Eileen. Who knows what it could have been. But I do think that when Erza came out, Eileen saw her as a monster. That's what I think, and I'm gonna hold out hope that we get further clarification on that. But you know, in a way, this chapter might explain why Erza is Erza. She had magic continuously dumped into her. She pretty much came from a dragon. She was born from a dragon. So you know, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. If this is the end of Eileen and she just goes down like a typical baddie, then you know, I'm gonna take it that's gonna be a bit of a failing to the character. And yeah, again, it's, you could say the anticlimactic just means, or just shows how unhinged Eileen is, but it's just not coherent with her other unhinged actions. Eileen's already shown she's unhinged. There should be some consistency, unless she's like downplaying it for this particular moment. Anyway, the art for her face when she actually says that she dumped Erza like trash, very nicely done. I think in that moment, like, you could see that she wants Erza to hurt. And again, that kind of desire, that's not someone who just lost interest and dumped it in a village like trash. Anyway, let's talk about Erza's reaction to this, because overall this is what tells us how important this chapter is. Erza ultimately comes to the point where she just says she's grateful for giving her life, and that she is grateful for her abandoning her because she found her true family in Fairy Tail. What that ultimately says to me is that that whole flashback doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to Erza, it doesn't matter to Fairy Tail. All that matters is that Eileen is an enemy who is standing in front of them right now. Doesn't matter that she suffered like heck. Doesn't matter that she went through hell, or a self-imposed hell by being a dragon. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that Erza has to take her down. And that ultimately tells us how important this chapter is. It's just a flashback. And it ultimately isn't going to change the future. That flashback might not change anything in the future. This chapter might not change anything. All that matters now is the immediate actions that Erza is going to take against Eileen. Because that's what's going to change the future. Knowing the flashback, that's for the readers. That's not for the world of Fairy Tail. It's for the readers. If you liked Eileen's character, now you have an understanding of Eileen. And ultimately, going back to how important this flashback is, Eileen's flashback really just puts her on the same level of puts her on the same level as Erza. Erza is a character who has been tortured. Erza is a character who has lost an eye. She was a child slave, and she developed a complex where she needed to wear armor to feel safe. Erza is a damaged character, and she went through utter hell, but she still turned out alright. Mind you, Eileen did have the added bonus of being a dragon and having the whole existential crisis, and that being what pushed her. But let's face it, Erza was a child slave, and that didn't corrupt her any more than what Eileen's become. So really, you know, Eileen getting that sad flashback really just puts her on the level of Erza. I think that's because it is unfair that I'm kind of taking away the mental torture that Eileen subjected herself to through her experience as a dragon. But overall, that part, you know, I think that's a matter of perspective. That was Eileen being traumatized from before, and it just getting worse. And Erza's already been tortured. So, you know, the flashback just puts her on the same level of Erza, I think. I might be a bit too harsh in that regard. Anyway, it was a very interesting thing, this chapter. Ultimately, I liked it, but I'm very apprehensive about the whole thing where Eileen just dumped Erza like trash. If we get a follow-up to this, then I think this chapter will be good, because then it's part of the narrative. Eileen talking like this is part of the narrative. But if we end it there, it's gonna feel kind of like a waste when it comes to like the things that have been set up before for the Fairy Tail chapters. Anyway, guys, you know, cool stuff. I like that in the end, Erza's just like, doesn't care, don't matter. I'm going to take you down. I'm grateful for you, but you're a bitch, so I'm gonna beat you. I like that overall reaction from Erza. Yeah, I think that's all I'll leave it. Let me know what you think of this chapter. Let me know where you think we're gonna go from here. And I'm gonna leave it there. Till next time, I hope you have a great day.